Our next presentation deals with building a data-led e-commerce organization. We have two speakers, Trey Harshfield, Global Director of E-commerce at Molson Coors, and Keith Anderson, SVP of Strategy and Insights at Profitero. Gentlemen, the podium is yours.
John, thank you very much. Thanks to Linda as well. I can't count how many of these we've participated in, but we really appreciate the opportunity, and it's good to see a lot of familiar names on the attendee list. So thanks everybody for joining us. I trust that you can see not only our static headshots at the bottom of the slide, but hopefully you can see us somewhere on your screen coming to you live as well. Trey and I thought perhaps a more engaging format for today's session would be to really have a conversation about some of mostly Trey's experience building an e-commerce organization with data at its core, but I'll certainly share some of my perspective as well. Trey is the head of global e-commerce at Molson Coors with really interesting perspective from his current role and some past roles as well. So maybe to kick things off, Trey, you can just tell the audience a bit about your current role and your background.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. So I've been in the e-commerce space for about 10 years now, and as you mentioned, on the retailer side with Walmart Inc., and then onto Amazon, and then getting some experience on the manufacturer side with some top-tiered CPG with Molson Coors and also PepsiCo. And so what I'm really excited about is, and has always excited me about the e-commerce digital space, is just the opportunity of massive amounts of data and being able to capture and measure and almost really control your own destiny with using data as a competitive advantage.
Well, that's a good place to start. Why don't we unpack for a few minutes why data as a focus for you?
Yeah, so for any retailer or brand, data is extremely important. And so the beauty of the digital space is the ultimate measurability of everything. Who you showed an ad to, who then had a behavior change, and being able to sum up all of those then millions of data streams to understand what consumer behavior looks like, thus comparing what happens in a retail brick and mortar environment, which is often you're looking at footfall traffic going through the door and then sales conversion, not really being able to measure what people picked up, what they looked at and said, not for me, and put it back on the shelf. So this is all, I'd say, very exciting space for us to get into as brand owners, and then also as retailers as they're looking to optimize that experience, and for brand owners being able to optimize on that experience of their brands through the retailers, through their digital touch points as well. And that's kind of what then the next step is of first being able to measure everything in the digital environment, but then having that data at your fingertips for consumers telling you with their behavior of whether it's conversion decrease or increase, hey, do more of this, do less of this. And then over a period of time, you're able to say, okay, this really works well for this brand at this retailer. And it's really I'd say, informing of a strategy that any brand and retailer can have, I'd say, with a deep rigor around data analytics of being able to have that be the backbone of measuring everything. And I think a lot of us are really in the space for some of the shiny objects of what's new and upcoming in e-commerce, but really being able to measure and understood what worked well and what didn't, and building on that is almost I'd say an excellent foundation to ensure that you're going to be on this broader learning journey, because that's also the point of why companies are pouring resources into e-commerce. You have 100, 200 person teams over North America alone for some of these brands, and driving e-commerce, and so and also the digital marketing piece. And so why companies are investing ahead of the curve is because of all these data streams and this optimization journey that they're on. And they understand that it's coming. And we can look in our crystal ball of the UK, where online grocery is 10+% of total sales in the grocery channel, knowing what that implication means in the US, and that we're on this hockey stick journey together. And we've seen other categories fall from a CPG perspective. So everyone knows that, hey, this is coming. So the important piece for, I'd say, this data and investing early on is where data helps you is learning then what did work and did not work. And then over the years, or year 2, 3, et cetera, as it becomes 4, 5, 10% of total business, you'll have a really high complex, low volume business that is turned into a remaining still complexity, being high, but then also high volume business. And it's going to be one of those things that the companies that are investing early on and into this space are going to have that piece figured out, that it's not just at the click of a button or hiring a very sharp team to figure it out. It's a journey, and I think that journey is really true for a lot of the brands that are investing in the space, and they understand it and they get it, and they're all really placing an emphasis on the data.
Yeah, it's sort of funny. I hadn't even connected these dots until I just listened to you answer that question. But I gave a presentation at a conference a few weeks ago, sharing some of the early findings from a new data set that we're using that covers traffic and conversion at Amazon. And the whole spirit of the discussion was, number one, that Amazon is a learning laboratory, and so surely you can build a business on Amazon or through Amazon. But to your point, what we're finding most interesting about the data is, one, it's available, and it gives you visibility to things that historically you just haven't been able to measure. And it's really about that continuous experimentation and learning by doing and measuring what you do and then applying it wherever you can. And I think that whole concept of a learning journey is really, really important for anybody that wants to play a role in this channel, because there are many ways to analogize what winning at the digital shelf takes in comparison and sometimes in contrast to brick and mortar. But there's no question it's much more dynamic. In some ways, it's more volatile. What worked last week might work this week, and it might not. And so the only constant is things are going to change. And if you don't have the data or a competency for analyzing the data, it can be really challenging to stay ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And the companies that are going to find themselves in a position having not invested in an e-commerce team or data analytics team to really pull those findings forward are going to be looking 3-5 years from now, when e-commerce is a material portion of their business, that some companies are touting, hey, we're having explosive e-commerce growth, and this is driving the total channel for us, or total grocery channel. So what these companies are going to find themselves is in this 3 to 5 year space where it does become important. You aren't going to be able to, again, just press a button or hire a team and figure this out. This truly is something that you have an iterative approach. And so by trying to cram 3-5 years of learning into a single year is going to be very, very expensive. And what's, I'd say, almost for everyone talks about the opportunity of growth online, but also I think equally on that inverse is the risk of doing nothing and saying, well, it's not a big, it's less than 1%, or it's only a couple points of total sales. So what does it matter for us now? But it's when it does become such a large, important piece that I think we're going to see the companies that invested early on become the true winners.
Yeah, I'm ecstatic to hear you emphasize both the opportunity and the risk. I've sort of observed in our industry, much less so today than even 3 years ago, but there has always been this resistance that I think comes from inertia to investing not even ahead of demand, but just to meet the demand that's already there. And a lot of it has come from questions about, is it incremental, and can we prove that it's incremental, and those are important questions, but they overlook the downside risk, as you say, of missing the boat. And if you choose not to do it, your competitors almost certainly will make a different choice. And as the U.S. and other markets follow a trajectory sort of like the U.K., even in grocery categories, it's a huge opportunity, but there's also some risk of not being present.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that risk is really exacerbated by who we consider our competition set today from a brand perspective, and call to the example we have internally for the ground coffee category, where it's the usual players of Starbucks, Green Mountain, and Folgers, kind of all commanding roughly 10% or so share, and the ground coffee category is growing, kind of 5% or so in total brick and mortar, total in a sense. And then looking on Amazon, that's growing, almost 2x category growth, gaining significant share. And the top three players are none of those other players. It's Nespresso, Death Wish, and San Francisco Bay. And so I think when you say now in this new e-commerce world, the barriers to entry are very low. So you no longer have to get in 4,500 doors at a Walmart. You now just have to have a single active listing on Amazon. You're nationwide. So I think these smaller brands are going to continue to fill niche needs, and they're going to be very up and coming on trend. So it's going to just keep big brands on their toes. And gone are the days of, I'd say, if you walk down a chip aisle and you've got a Frito-Lay modular, there's going to be 4 feet of Lay's yellow bag. Well, online, that 4 feet, you can't miss it in store, but online, that's got to come to the surface as one of the top ranking items. So those are I think where that risk comes to life, and companies that are going to leverage data are going to be able to not only just throw money at this and invest in the space correctly, but then do it in the correct way. And I think data unlocks then defining what are the next steps of things to do.
Agreed. Well, let's dig into what data. You've mentioned a couple metrics that are helpful to look at, but why don't we drill in and go through, what are the types of data that you're looking for, where do you get it, and what do you do with it?
Yeah, sure. So I think just first to caveat is that no single data set is going to be your silver bullet for whether it's a type of source that really tells the whole story. There's going to be some sort of consumer behavior piece that's talking about conversion, which is then on the retailer side a function of traffic and orders. And so brands often don't see that level of data, but it's often very important to understand if content changes work, or if a promotion's working with click-through and things like that. So that's a component, but then also, sales are always kind of deemed as one of the most important KPIs, and they are, and they should be. But I think there's a lot of things that are underlying as well that come with the sales stories. So knowing that no single data set covers, and Keith, I believe you guys have a pretty good slide from the toolkit that was published, from just kind of walking through as well of the different types of data that I really liked and reference often.
Yeah. I mean, this is, to jump ahead to it, this is excerpted from a guide that we first published in October of last year. We update it quarterly now. This is embedded in the report, which covers, if you can believe it, 300 different solution providers, all with something to sell people like Trey or anybody in the e-commerce world. And part of the reason that we authored this was just to illuminate the complexity and help the industry appreciate the point you just made, Trey, which is while there are data sets that on a surface level answer similar business questions, there are almost always trade-offs in areas like breadth, which in this case refers to really breadth of coverage of categories or retailers, So, a good example of data like panel data will cover the total market in many cases. So almost any retailer that you might want top-level visibility into will be included. But it is, by definition, usually less granular than the data that you may be able to get directly from a retailer. So you really do have to go through an exercise to map the business questions that you're trying to answer or the use case for a certain type of data, and then just be open-eyed about some of the constraints or limitations. You may not be able to go to an item level, or the data may be available for some retailers and not others. Or it may be available for all the retailers. It just may be better interpreted as directional than the perfect truth. So there may come a day. I hope while my career is still underway, where you don't need to look at eye charts like this and try and figure out, okay, I need these 4 data sets from these 5 companies. But until that day comes, you do really have to roll up your sleeves and unpack what are the data sets that exist, what are the strengths, weaknesses, limitations, and then how do I piece it all together?
Yeah, exactly. And when you're determining what data sets you need, I think understanding first your objective, and whether that is to just define overall health KPIs, or if you're looking specifically at a granular marketing activation project or something of that sort. And these are going to vary wildly across retailer. They're going to have a completely different set of metrics that they'll be looking at versus then the brands. So at least from a brand perspective, just to give some color on where we spend a lot of our time. And just note, we're I'd say super early in our journey right now with I kind of call it a data drought, and we've been spending the last year and a half doing a great job of partnering with retailers to understand and really serve as additional arms and legs to be some analytical horsepower, because we know everyone's spread thin in this space, and so e-commerce is extremely complex. And it's lower volume, so the resourcing isn't always as robust as we would like or as it potentially would need, and there's just an infinite amount of data that you can go through. So you have to really pick and choose which projects you want to go deep on, and what's then going to be the output or the value that you need to kind of complete either a selling story or inform your strategy. And so for us, and really on the brand side, is really POS sales are very important for just at a high level, and it sounds like it might be pretty simple of aggregating all that across our retailer network, but it's really not. It's very difficult, especially in the online grocery space, where some of the tools and even major retailers like Walmart and then you've got regional players as well, that just getting access to, hey, what's selling online, and then we can check what's selling in store, identify very quick opportunities of what we can potentially enhance or even accelerate. That's kind of over-indexing. So those types of things and battles are very real in our space. And then we also look at digital shelf. So this is something for us as brands are early on their journey, and making sure their brands' content for Molson Coors, our remit is to ensure our brands appear better online than they do in store. And that should be pretty easy, right? Because you have the ability to put video on, multiple images, and go way beyond what packaging can really hold from a print standpoint. So we focus really laser on our accuracy, which then feeds into compliance. So compliance are rules that guide our content principles of how we've developed our gold standard content. And then ultimately we're looking at search ranking as an output. So all of the things that we have built our gold standard content on are then measured within the Profitero system, and then we track search ranking for the key terms that we know, and then actually look to accelerate some of the position on the key terms. And alcohol is a tricky one in that we can't invest $1 with a retailer. There's no value to be given. So we are really kind of all in this alcohol space figuring out how do you win organic search. And so it's not this pay to play that many of the CPGs are. So we're in a different focus area, and there's, I'd say, a little less rigor in our high regulatory markets around this. But so for traditional CPG, I'd say the activation output of what were the impressions driven, click-through, placement, all that type would kind of roll into here as well for more of a paid marketing strategy as an output. And then we also look at and where we can get any usability or shopper behavior data. So oftentimes we'll have great retail partners and we'll present to them an opportunity to say, hey, just throw us your keyword search data and we'll parse through it, understand and identify opportunities for the category. So we can do this. And then even looking at kind of qual, walkthrough, shop alongs, et cetera, and then even looking at eye and cursor tracking heat maps of how people are shopping the category. And so one thing for beer category alone that we know is it's a very exploratory category with a very large assortment. So traditional taxonomy is a bit of a painful experience from a frustration standpoint. So we're really trying to key into how do you make this a fun category to shop, fun and easy category to shop online when there's so many choices, and typically people default to asking someone, well, this is what I like. Well, then you might like this. So I think thinking of the category experience in that way through the shopper behavior data. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the marketing activation output for brands is going to be much heavier focus in the kind of non-regulated space for CPGs of how much they're investing with Amazon, Walmart, et cetera, and what are the click or cost per clicks for some of the key search terms, what are some of the most effective promotions, and then even I'd say kind of attribution of where is this marketing kind of in that final conversion being attributed to, because there's a lot of noise out there. And I think as marketers, we all know that if you're looking at NMA models, multi-mix attribution models, then you're very familiar that digital does play a part in this. But I think we'll, and the likes of P&G and several other major CPGs are leaning into this to say, hey, this is BS. We should be able to track this from more end to end. So I think we'll see a lot of upcoming attribution enhancements over time.
There's an interesting point embedded in the headline of this slide, which is we're doing this to support practitioners. Maybe you can talk for a minute. In the introduction, you talked a bit about you can go hire somebody or hire a team, and you can get all this data, and that's necessary, but sort of insufficient. Can you talk a little bit about beyond just getting the data itself? What's involved in building that organization so that the right people have access to the right data and tools to be effective in their roles?
Yeah, I think it's a fun challenge, I'd say, coming into an organization that previously didn't have a lot of the data aggregated and or really know that there was a need, because the business is so small. It's like we don't need to spend our time measuring something that's this insignificant. We need to spend more time doing. And so really creating first that, I'd say, that culture shift of, hey, this is important, and thinking of whether it's 1 million or 1 billion or 100,000 even, like those are all, I'd say, still working on our approach and refining our approach, whether it's all of those things will continue to grow. And so as we're getting, I'd say, more in line with aggregating streams of data that we have, which a lot of our EPOS data, they're kind of snowflake streams. We get them from either direct, we pull them from portals, or we get them from Nielsen, et cetera. So we're aggregating the best we can. And so what we're able to do and build from a internal tool standpoint is a centralized way that we can run our e-commerce kind of at a monthly performance, quarterly performance level and review, and treat it just as we would any other business or any other channel. And that's where I felt we've had a lot of success in standing up these tools that are removing a lot of this manual reporting, or if you're prepping for a customer meeting, that might be the one time that you look at sales versus kind of ongoing, keeping a track of, are we where we said we would be and where we need to be for this e-commerce channel to gain incremental investment. So I think it's important along kind of all of those fronts from a planning standpoint, reduction of manual research and analytics time, because everything is kind of at your fingertips to slice and dice and filter and export just as you would want. But then also as a broader kind of cultural data shift is into that space of thinking of e-commerce as another channel. And when you start to put numbers by it, you start to say, okay, well, regardless of if the number is 100,000 or 100 million, is it hitting plan, yes or no? And starting to treat it the exact same way. So I think we're making a lot of progress on this front.
Yeah, as I listen to you, what I really like about what you've done is first automate what can be automated, so that the heavy lifting of just getting to some structured reporting is already behind you. And there's some natural periodicity or sort of a natural cadence that you've already landed on, monthly and quarterly, so that people know when they're gonna see the scoreboard, essentially. And then you've got other data sets, and I'll jump back to this view for a second. You've got other data sets that link pretty directly to the work of account teams, brand teams, category teams, so that in some cases, what you're really looking at are outputs or outcomes. You know, what's our share and what's selling. Some of these digital shelf metrics you might think of as inputs or things that you can actively manage. And if you establish a cadence and the right people know what the reporting is going to indicate, and they know what to do with those indications, you can really operationalize the work in this channel just as you would in any other channel.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this having the data then informs where you need to push. And you know, our Miller Coors US team is a skeleton crew, but they're rock stars, and they get shit done, and they're awesome to work alongside. And I think pairing with data then allows us to understand, hey, who are the top priority customers from just an always-on strategic importance standpoint, and then where do we then have gaps with what we can measure and drive. And I think that's where we're able to fill those with the data and help us prioritize our time better, because there's not enough hours in the day. There's always something that can be done from an e-com perspective, and whether you're diving into data to find an answer to something, or if you're fixing your content, it's which is kind of a game of whack-a-mole that we've found. But I've really been, I'd say, over the last year, very strategic and pragmatic about how we're incorporating data into our approach, because we know that there's so many hours in the day, and data can really help point on our prioritization list. Yeah.
I mean, my title is strategy, and it's often said that strategy is as much about what you choose not to do as what you choose to do. And I repeat that every opportunity I have as it relates to e-commerce, because if you go to any conference, you're going to hear 8 podium speeches that say there's only 8 things that you need to do for each of your products at each of your retailers every day, and they're always changing. And you know, people leave these events and say, executive team, we need 10 times the budget, 10 times the headcount. We'll never be able to do it all. And the reality is, we've never met a company that's got sufficient time, budget, or staff to do everything that you could do. And so, to your point, Trey, one of the unlocks of having data like you've sort of wrangled at Molson Coors is not only guidance about what to do, but almost the freedom to make decisions about what not to spin your wheels on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go even deeper into some of the challenges that you've encountered along this journey so far, and where you found a solution, what you've done to solve some of those challenges.
Okay. Cool. One of the primary challenges we have around data on the manufacturer side is simply that we don't own many of the sources of the data. The retailers have the keys to the Ferrari in that sense. And so I think we have to earn our way up into getting access to different levels of the data that are then going to help inform more category projects and direction. And so while we're piecing all this together, I think within not owning from the overall source of data means we have to really look at what we can piece together that has the entire picture of the whole pie of what's happening. Because as I mentioned earlier, there's not just one single metric that is going to be typically your silver bullet in broad e-commerce KPI health sense. And so when we have requesting from retailers, we find that sometimes the retailers are so skeleton crews, as I mentioned, and they don't have either the time to pull it, and this is going to be often their systems are going to require SQL, so it's like manual coding, and then it's kind of just trial by ultimately like your 8th time it goes through, even though you didn't seemingly change anything in your code, which I've kind of been there. Or then they don't have the tools as well. So not everybody has Slick Retail Link or Vendor Central to pull this and query the e-com data. And so a lot of the specific questions that we have are great questions, but the retailers aren't set up to necessarily just hand over the data because it would be really, I'd say, there's a lot of sensitivity around that on their side. And so when we're coming to them to say, hey, we want to see if our mobile optimized images are driving higher conversion, well, they'll be like, okay, well, I'll put this on my list. And for that to crack the top 15 of their daily priorities is often very, very low chance of that. And then also some retailers just within the online grocery space, there's just a lot of sensitivity around any sort of traffic numbers. If you've ever worked with Amazon, then you fully get how kind of just in the dark shroud they are of secrecy, but no traffic numbers, and then volume is often sometimes sensitive, especially I think a little earlier on in online grocery. No one wanted to show their cards of here's what's really selling on this platform because there was so much writing on it, I think, from some of these companies from a Wall Street perspective as well. So you have the sensitivity, and then I think then just overall resourcing of time. And then with the being able to also, I'd say, look at these sources of data is once you do have it, and I think integration into some of these work streams and organizations I mentioned, they're not data first cultures. And so when you're first of all, you've got a scarcity of data, and so I think you solve that through working through retailer relationships, identify who has kind of will and skill, and you work along that front, and like I said, earn your way up. You start with sales data. You can go to availability data. You can go to then, category browse behavior data, et cetera. So earning your way up, showing category value is a solve for that. And then I think then you battle internal, as a lot of these digital teams are a lot of them external hires, and it's just a different way of thinking in that it's, again, high complex, currently low volume, but high projected growth. So everyone will agree that it's important. But then when it comes to the brass tacks of if we need to invest in this, then we are taking a dollar from somewhere else. And a lot of companies are in an environment right now where that's really tough to do. So it's not just it is a zero-sum game. So if something is being invested in, then there is some de-investment somewhere else or de-leverage. So I think as we're leaning into driving e-commerce and digital as a true solution, data is going to be how we carve our path and justify it. And so by showing very clearly, you hand me $1 for investment, and I'll give you $2 in growth. There's many retail activations or marketing activations that really struggle to be that clear with the ROI, which I think digital and e-commerce can absolutely bring that forward. So demystifying it for us is really important, and just looking at the inputs and outputs, and again creating that data first culture, and just explaining that e-commerce is no different than if there was a new format of channel out there. So C-Store was once upon a time a new channel. We didn't think it was that scary or difficult. We just put resources behind it, and and staffed our customers, just as we should with e-commerce. And then lastly, with data first culture, I think the initial knee-jerk reaction is to go after the shiny objects. So it's we need AR. Well, what do we need AR for? I don't know. We need it. Okay. Well, technology solves problems or enables us to solve problems. So I think kind of getting away from the shiny object and focusing on fundamentals with leadership is really, really important early on. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying with just how important data is and establishing this measurability, because that I think is really infectious, because once leadership is seeing, well, I mean, they can tell me how much what the ROI is, like exactly, why can't you? And so I think that will then flood into other areas of our business. And I think it's data's like a drug. And once you start to get leadership hooked on it, it's great. And I think e-commerce and digital marketing are one to really benefit from that. So as far as combating some of this data first culture that may or may not exist, is just simply raising organizational IQ of having, getting some of the leadership. What we found is really effective is giving leadership homework of saying, here, go actually buy beer online and tell me what you think is good and bad about the experience. And, notice what, visit a website and then notice what ads are being served. Like, so they start to kind of connect the dots and they know what to look for. And it's a beautiful thing once you see it all kind of come together and they're like, wow, this is actually a future. It's going to happen, but here's what's bad about it. And so they understand that the reality of the art of the possible, but then the current state.
Even there's a slide that we use sometimes, especially when we're working with a client, but with a team or an executive at the client that's less familiar with the channel, that literally just lays out common KPIs you use to measure brick and mortar and the closest counterpart online. And that simple bridge between the very familiar and what is usually less familiar goes a long way towards helping people understand, even though a lot of the vocabulary is new and different, the fundamentals are pretty similar. And while there is often a great reason to invest in a shiny new object, you have to be really clear that moving the needle on volume in the first quarter of an AR pilot is not the likeliest outcome. It may get you great attention from investors or the trade press, and those are very valid reasons to run a pilot, but you do have to define success going in as either publicity or market share or something else, and have a pretty clear expectation that what you're doing is going to drive the outcome that you want.
Yeah.
You used a phrase that I just want to briefly unpack for the audience. You were talking about retailers and said, we look for the retailers with the will and the skill. Maybe you can just expand a little bit on that concept.
Yeah. So we think about retailer prioritization, as I referenced. Most manufacturers are operating with skeleton e-commerce crews as are retailers. And so when we think about where retailers kind of fall within a prioritization, for us, it's effectively two axes. And the first is strategic importance or potentially strategic growth or long-term growth. And then also the will and skill. And so will and skill is a really important concept because somebody can be your largest customer and not return an email. So good luck getting something done with that. And then also the skill piece is somebody can return all of your emails, but just have no idea how to get something done that you need done. So they have a poor e-commerce platform, they have no data capability, something like that. So where you want to place these retailers within kind of more quadrants, and then that lower left quadrant is where you still want to offer a fantastic experience from a customer standpoint of you're going to have great content, we're going to call it quarterly, and we're going to engage and try to sell in more category solutions and help bring the beer category to life. Where then on the inverse you have like your strategic, which is a high volume / strategic significance with also high will and skill. So this is where you have that sweet spot of people that, when a manufacturer and a retailer are both aligned on growing the category and venturing into some white space areas. And I think those are very, very exciting spaces to be, because we're really in this kind of final frontier of CPG with alcohol, in that there's no monetization to it. So I think retailers have been, this is like the last touched category that is starting to become staffed up, where I think you kind of started with like, oh, I've got a buyer that's center store for all of e-com. Well, that's hundreds of vendors. So you can see where quickly a category that you can't monetize from a retail perspective is going to fall a little lower on the list. So we're absolutely ready, and we're building into these retailers that are ready for us as well.
And one of the things I often see, and I think it's been your experience, sometimes it's a retailer that is successful, but maybe not the number one or number two retailer in a given market. But they've got that will and skill, and they can be a great partner and learning laboratory. Again, in the spirit of that point about Amazon, sometimes what you can learn from and achieve with one retailer transcends that one retailer. So it's not that you take whatever you learn and immediately take it to their competitor, but you can learn with them in ways that benefit them, but also benefit your entire business.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And any of these, broadly, I understood completely the sensitivity around data, and we're extremely respectful of that. And in no way, shape, or form is some of that secret sauce that we would be developing with a particular retailer ever be shared with another. So I think we're 100% on board with that and understand the sensitivities. So that's one thing to flag as well, and as part of earning that trust.
So as I look at the time, you spent a little time talking about some of the challenges of getting the right data or the right cooperation from the retailers. What about third-party sources of data?
Yes, so the third-party sources of data, first, if you think about the shelf life of these things, it's really tough to reference a 2017 study here in 2019. So you've got a limited time to use these things, and often what organizations are doing is spending a ton of money trying to answer every single question, when that study isn't going to be kind of published it took a full year to develop, and it's published at the end of the year, and it's all of a sudden stamped 19, and then you're referencing and using it in the next year, and then the following year it's kind of like, do we want to use a 2-year-old appearing deck? So I think be very cognizant of the shelf life of these things, and then also for other third-party and insights research, the eye tracking and cursor is really, really important qual work, just to understand, I'd say, up front as you're going on your journey, but it's I'd say almost cost prohibitive to do so much of this every single time to try to learn something new of like, oh, well, how'd this banner perform versus. So I think get a little more macro with what you're doing with some of the more expensive research to draw some broader inferences from it versus really expensive for kind of granular point in time output. And then overall with third-party data, there is like I said, there's kind of a data drought, especially from an alcohol perspective. And so there's a lot of panel data out there and share, et cetera. But just knowing, and I think as marketers and as anybody using data, always question, where does this data come from? What are the assumptions that you're making, extrapolations, and just to take it not necessarily at face value of, oh, well, this data set said my share was something %, so that's whether it's good or bad. Don't dismiss it just because it's bad, but don't accept it just because it's good either. And I think always push the button to understand what you can be doing in that space. And I think our solution that we've really been focused on is just continuing to test, learn, and apply continuously. So we don't want to go for the home run insights project. We want to break them up into smaller, digestible bits and keep us nimble, because our learning journey does change, and we have new questions pop up that are seemingly kind of like the most important kind of mid-year that we wouldn't have been able to to predict based on either data sets or based on things that we've done. So I think don't lock yourself into one glorious revelation, and just keep learning, and then understand that as you're starting on your macro journey, do that big body of work first to inform just how shoppers are shopping the category, but also know that at the end of the day, for online grocery and e-commerce, this is still a small percent of the population. So you're not done. And so with the beer category, it's less than 1% of sales online today. And if we're talking to just people that are shopping the beer category online today, that might not be the right people to talk to. So we've got a whole other 99% of folks out there that represent the mass of potential new shoppers, and just understanding that may change over time.
Well said. Well, Trey, thank you very much for your insight. I certainly learned a lot. I think the audience probably did too. John, I'll leave it to you to let us know whether we left enough time for any Q&A from the audience.
We have a little time, but I don't see any questions that have come in that you didn't answer along the way, so I think we're good, Keith.
Perfect. All right, Trey, thanks again. Thank you, John and Linda.
Sure, thank you both. That was excellent, and something very new for the Lead Marketing Conference. I appreciate the effort.
Perfect.
Okay, if you need more information about this topic, you can contact Keith directly at keith@profitero.com.